50 years ago, Brady and Myra Hindley killed for the first time. It was the start of a horrific child-killing spree that shocked and scandalized the nation. The couple have been front-page news ever since. Brady wanted to commit the perfect murder, to keep possession of his victims. Dark secrets in shallow graves on the moors above Manchester. For the first time on television, we hear Myra Hindley's version of events, recorded from a prison cell.
The living room door was open and all I could see was blood everywhere.
We reveal the photographic system that Brady and Hindley used to celebrate the killings and to mark the graves of their victims. Could these photographs suggest a new, secret burial site? And hold the key to finding the grave of 12-year-old Keith Bennett, still missing after half a century?
That is that, I think.
The Moors murders were classified by the police as a cold case 4 years ago. It's been left to the family and well-meaning volunteers to continue searching on the moors for the lost boy, Keith Bennett.
That fault's there.
Yeah.
Photographs have always been central to the Moors murders. After Brady and Hindley were arrested in 1965, the police discovered what at first seemed to be an ordinary family album. But scattered among the innocuous snaps of relatives, birthdays and holidays were other images that aroused the curiosity of detectives.
They had this album of photographs and they said to me, will you just identify these pictures or tell us if you've seen them before? And I looked and it was a moorland scene. I couldn't say I hadn't because I was standing on a rock and I said, yes.
You're not sure, are you?
No, it's bang on. Come forward. That's as close as damn it.
The photographs were, for Brady and Hindley, acts of celebration, a way of extending the moment, keeping it alive.
I think that's very typical of people who want to not only be aware of what they've done, but to be reminded of what they've done as a re-stimulation even of some of the arousal and enjoyment you got from the things you've carried out. Those kind of memories would be delightful.
The police used this knowledge in their search for bodies. Several of the photographs showed the killers stood on or near the graves of their victims. Tombstones of their own making, in the words of the prosecution at their trial. But once they were safely behind bars, the album's worth was forgotten. It was even sent back to Brady and Hindley. In 1998, Myra Hindley was campaigning to get out of prison. Duncan's staff was writing a book on the Moors murders and asked her to put down her version of events for him. She sent him hundreds of pages of letters and tape recordings describing how they'd killed 5 children. When she died, he was handed her secret stash of papers. This included an unpublished autobiography, 30 years of letters to her mother, and a vast stash of forgotten photographs. She admitted that these pictures hold the key to where the children are buried.
For the first time in her unpublished autobiography, Myra Hindley confirmed that it wasn't accidental, it wasn't that there were 1 or 2 marker photographs of bodies. This was a system, and this was something that Brady used every time he killed somebody.
Myra Hindley was born into the tough working-class world of Gorton in Manchester. Hindley's father, Bob, came home from the Second World War to these streets and spent much of his time in the Steelworks Tavern, drinking and fighting.
Violence was a part of Myra's life from her earliest childhood. Her father, he was a drinker, he used to come back, he'd slap her mother about, he'd slap Myra about. On the other hand, she could see herself in him. When she looked at him, she could see her face. And her father, from a young age, he taught her how to fight. Her father had been a champion boxer in the army. He taught Myra how to look after herself.
When she was 5, Myra moved to live with her grandmother.
Myra Hindley's relationship with Gorton was a very complicated one. She played here, she fought here. This is the world that shaped her. This is what she was until she met Ian Brady.
Myra Hindley's young life was tough. She was looking for something better. She found it at the Catholic monastery of St. Francis, which loomed over Gorton.
She was a very strong practicing Catholic at that time. There was a church which was quite near her home. Well, she said it was an incredibly beautiful place. The elaborate sort of building and the decoration within it was something outside the people's experience who lived around it. So it offered them a view of something greater. It lifted people to look heavenward and to look up. And she talked about it in those terms.
It became her world. It became an escape from her working class background. Somewhere she found inspiration and she immersed herself totally in that world.
Hindley left school at 15 and took a succession of typing jobs, ending up 3 years later at Millward's Merchandising, a Gorton-based chemical company. Here, in 1961, she first set eyes on the company's 23-year-old bookkeeper, Ian Brady. With her peroxide blonde hair, Hindley cut a striking figure. She was used to male attention, but Brady treated her differently.
He completely ignored her for many, many months. You know, he was different. In as much as he was smart, he was highly intelligent and aloof, and she was clearly quite taken by him.
Brady and Hindley became a couple, drawn together by a shared sense of dislocation from their working class roots.
Myra Hindley was absolutely besotted by Brady. They were living in a sort of parallel universe to their peers, I think.
Ian Brady and Myra Hindley had one thing in common. They didn't like where they came from. And in their relationship, they found, in their minds, the ability to lift themselves up, to create a world, to create something special, their own place. It wasn't a world apart. Myra was always very clear about that. It was a world above.
This world above was in part a physical place. The couple haunted the moors above Manchester, Brady recording every moment. But Brady's vision was a dark one. He looked down on conventional morality. Rules were for the deluded, religion for the weak. He idolized the Nazis. He read de Sade. And Hindley was a willing pupil.
He saw that she worshipped God, that this was an important part of her life, and what he did, I think, was to dismantle that. He showed her that there was another power, and I think he created a vacuum by taking away the church and filling it with other things. And so, I mean, I hesitate to use the word, but I think he filled her with evil.
Ian Brady is a full-on psychopath. He was also a sexual sadist. He enjoyed cruelty in the context of sexual satisfaction. He's a control animal in the sense that he has to control the environment about him, thus his ability to get Myra Hindley to do certain things. He has all the characteristics of someone who's manipulative, who's pathologically charming, who is violent towards other people without thinking twice about it, and who's cold and remorseless.
This is where it had all been leading. Brady told Hindley he wanted to abduct a child, to rape, kill, and bury it on the moor. The victim would never be found. For Brady, it would be the perfect murder, and Hindley was essential to his plan.
Her role throughout these appalling crimes was to procure the victims. He knew and she knew that if Brady had gone along to try and snatch these kids off the streets, it simply wouldn't have happened. So she was an absolutely crucial part of the whole process. There's no doubt about that, and she knew it.
Brady made meticulous plans, and then he and Hindley started cruising the streets around Gorton, searching for a victim. On the 12th of July 1963, they found one.
This is Froxmore Street in Gorton, the site of the first abduction. The way Myra Hindley described it in her letters to me was that she came round that corner there in her van, and she saw a girl walking along the pavement ahead of her. Ian Brady, who was following on his motorbike, flashed his headlight, so Myra pulled the van in, wound down the window, and immediately recognised the girl as Pauline Reade, someone she'd known since childhood. She said to Pauline that she'd lost a glove on Saddleworth Moor and asked her would she mind coming to look for it. This is the story that Myra gave. Pauline, she says, agreed, got into the van with her, and they drove off with Ian Brady following on his motorbike.
In July 1963, 15-year-old Pauline Reade became the first Moors murder victim. Driven to Saddleworth Moor, where Ian Brady raped her and cut her throat beside the main Manchester to Barnsley road.
Myra Hindley, in her letters to me, gave a very vivid description of how she could hear Pauline bleeding to death, and that afterwards she helped to bury her. And she was very clear in the letter. She said that at this point she realised that she'd reached the point of no return. She has entered the world of Ian Brady, and there's no way back. She's separated forever from everything that she had and was before she met him.
Pauline was dead and buried in a shallow grave on Saddleworth Moor. 4 months later, Brady and Hindley struck again.
That night, I'll never forget that night when we got sent to bed early. He was never ever late, ever late. He went to do his packing up his work on the market, and we never saw him again. And my mum were looking all over the place. Everybody on the street were looking, neighbours, family were looking. And it got around 8:30, 9 o'clock, and my mum rang the police then.
12-year-old John Kilbride seemed to have vanished without trace. But these were innocent times. He was just a missing person. Nobody had even heard of serial killers. But the days turned to weeks, turned to months.
My mother, she just went, she went in a world of her own. She'd just sit there, staring out of the window, looking with tears rolling down her face. It was gloom, no joy left.
But while John was missing, there was still hope. The Kilbrides prayed for his return.
At the beginning when John was missing, well, I hadn't any hope really, although with nothing being found. I bought clothes as the months went by, bigger sizes, you know, to fit him in case he came back. But the real fear I had was that I wouldn't see him again.
Well, I have a photograph in here of when we used to all sit round the table having a meal. And that's the chair which is empty there, which was John's chair. And we're all there, my mum and my dad and our Downey and Patrick, myself there, Sheila and Marie and young Christopher stood at the side of John's chair. It was always empty, the chair, for the day John came home, you know. But he never did. He never came home after that.
The Kilbrides couldn't know it, but 12-year-old John had become the second Moors murder victim. Like Pauline before him, he'd been lured to his doom by Myra Hindley. Both now lay buried in shallow graves on the moors above Manchester. On Boxing Day 1964, 10-year-old Lesley Ann Downey vanished from a fairground in Ancoats, Manchester. Within hours, she was dead. The list of victims was getting longer.
After the Lesley Ann Downey murder, I didn't think in terms of redemption, but if I did, I would have said I knew I was beyond redemption, that I would never, ever be anything other than what I've become, totally corrupt, evil, wicked.
Nobody was linking the cases, and why would they? There were no bodies. They were perfect murders. For now. For Brady and Hindley, things started to go wrong once they moved to the newly built East Manchester suburb of Hattersley.
Hattersley, a Manchester overspill area, is the epitome of respectable working-class suburbia. Rows of new brick boxes, the odd skyscraper block of flats, and rents at £3 a week.
Hindley's grandmother got a house on the estate, and the couple went with her. Hindley's sister Maureen and her husband, David Smith, became neighbours. Brady, once so careful, started to let Smith, a man with a violent criminal past, into their world. When the typewriter on which Myra Hindley had been writing to Duncan's staff broke, she committed her words to tape. This remarkable recording gives her account of the murder of Edward Evans in the autumn of 1965.
It was the night of October the 6th, and I just had this awful feeling of dread. We drove into Manchester Central Station, and he told me it wouldn't be long, unfortunately, or unfortunately. He then appeared with this news. Turned out he was 17, and he introduced him as Eddie, and I said virtually nothing going back. Ian had taken Evans into the front room and opened a bottle of wine, and he said to me quietly, "Go and get Dave."
Brady and Hindley were involving a third person in their murderous world, Myra's brother-in-law, David Smith. It was to be their downfall. Hindley's own self-serving account puts her outside the room as Evans was slaughtered.
The living room door was open, and all I could see was blood everywhere. And I stayed in the kitchen and I was sick. I just cannot stand the sight of blood. Never have been able to. I thought David Smith had killed him at first, but Ian said he'd hit him, Edward Evans, with the hatchet to shut him up.
At 6 o'clock on the Thursday morning, David Smith, who was the key witness to the murder of Edward Evans, rang Hyde Police Station to say there'd been a murder. My boss was called in. He came into the office and said to me, "Get your coat, we've got a murder." And then from there it all unfolded and all heck was let loose.
Smith had gone to the police. Ian Brady was arrested. To the authorities, this was an isolated, if bloody, incident. They were yet to discover the gruesome reality of the situation. Myra Hindley remained at liberty.
She visited Hyde Police Station daily to ask about Brady. I went out for lunch one day, and as we walked down the street, I saw Myra Hindley with her mother leaning against the co-op wall in Hyde. Myra then was wearing a bright red coat, suicide blonde hair and dark eye makeup. Hindley was eating a cream bun, looking quite unperturbed about anything. To me, it isn't a natural reaction to circumstances so serious.
4 days later, Myra Hindley was arrested. The police took apart the house at Hattersley.
An officer in the search at 16 Waldbrook Avenue found in the spine of a Bible a ticket for a left luggage. Even hardened officers were upset by the contents of the find. It blew up into what eventually became the Moors murders.
In a locker in Manchester Central Station, the police had found pictures and a tape recording documenting the abduction and abuse of a young girl. There were names and plans which suggested not just one murder, but an orgy of slaughter. There was clear evidence of Myra Hindley's involvement.
They started questioning me, and I always remembered Ian telling me that if ever anything like this happened, to not answer any questions at all, to say nothing. I evaded everything.
While the police struggled to get anything out of the couple, a search of the moors above Manchester began. Aware of a huge story unfolding, all of Fleet Street was there.
There was, I don't know, 17, 18, no more than that. And everybody in the area was fascinated, intrigued and horrified by what transpired, really.
Doug Pickford was a trainee reporter with a local paper. This was his first murder.
It wasn't a serene hunt for bodies or anything like that. It was a bit of a media circus in a way we'd call it now. And even the public joined in. They were coming in and asking the police, where's the best place to look what you're doing, you know? And the police were saying, oh, go up there, mate. It was cold, but I think there was an ice cream van at one time.
The police also began examining something else they'd found in the locker at the station. A tartan-covered family photo album. Many of the photographs contained within it were of Hindley and Brady on the moors. But was this record of their world above the innocuous keepsake it seemed?
You look at Ian Brady's record of his relationship with Myra, and it's taken on expensive medium format camera equipment, producing big, sharp, rich negatives. Photographs really mattered to him because they allowed him to record the world that he'd created. They were his record of the world above that he'd created with Myra, and they were the record of the Moors murders.
Helped by photographs from the tartan album, and by some good fortune, the police stumbled on a body.
The search was just about to be called off, and a young constable called Constable Spears, in a last minute that they were there, found a bone sticking up, and it was Lesley and Downey's finger sticking through the soil.
News of the discovery filtered through to Myra Hindley in custody.
And I was sitting in the small dining area, and I heard a couple of the women talking about a body being found on the moor, and I thought, oh God. And I was taken to Hyde Police Station, where my solicitor was waiting for me, and he told me they'd found the body of a child, identified as Lesley and Downey.
Lesley Ann Downey was the first victim to be recovered from Saddleworth Moor in October 1965. There were photographs taken near her grave in Brady's tartan album. The police looked for others that might mark burial sites.
There was one picture in particular. Myra Hindley was knelt down looking, and she had this dog under her coat, and they assumed that she wasn't just kneeling down looking at the ground, so they assumed that there was a grave under those stones. The way she was knelt and the way she was sort of half smiling, a sort of a grin on her face. They went out with a determination to find that grave, and find it they did.
People were saying, God, how many more will there be? People just didn't know. The police didn't know. The public didn't know, the press didn't know. No one knew what was going on, really. How far that couple had gone with their evil ways, if you like.
2 policemen came in and started asking me questions, and they had this album of photographs, and they turned over the page, and it was horrendous. They'd unearthed the body of John Kilbride, and I turned my head away and I said, I'm not looking at the house. Please close that book.
The Kilbride family had waited for 2 years for news of John, and when it came, it was as bad as it could possibly be.
I could hear my mother from upstairs crying. We came downstairs, my dad was sat with his head in his hands crying in the chair. It was just deadly silent apart from tears. But my mother just kept bursting out crying all the time, my mum. All the time. She was ruined. That was the end of her life. It was the end of her life, that. They got the justice in the end, but there's no justice. The justice should have been John sat at that table, eating his meals with us every night, like he used to do.
The police had 3 bodies: Edward Evans, killed in Hattersley, and Lesley and Downey and John Kilbride, buried in shallow graves on Saddleworth Moor. There was talk of others, but the search was wound down. On the 6th of December 1965, with the eyes of the world on Hyde Magistrates Court, Brady and Hindley stood charged with murder.
Well, hanging's too good for them.
Well, it is, it's too quick.
It is. They want to torture them.
I'd never covered a murder story before, in any shape or form. And so I don't know what I was expecting, but I wasn't expecting that. It's something I wouldn't like to experience again.
The most shocking evidence heard at the committal was the tape that Brady and Hindley had made as they'd abused 10-year-old Lesley Ann Downey. It was too upsetting to play in open court. A handful of reporters were allowed to hear it.
To me, the most chilling part of it was Myra Hindley was talking to the little girl. The little girl was calling her mummy. It was the futility of it all, really, of this poor little child. It was sad. It was horrendous. 2 Christmases ago, I was in a store locally, and Little Drummer Boy was played over the... And I just had to go out of the store because Little Drummer Boy was some of the music that was played on the tape as things were happening to the young girl. And that really got to me. Still does. And it got to a lot of other people as well.
Brady and Hindley was sentenced to life in prison. The criminal justice system had done its job. It had caught, tried, convicted and imprisoned 2 serial killers. But with at least 1 child still missing, 15-year-old Pauline Reade, Ian Brady had what he craved: possession of the body. But the longer they were apart in prison, the harder it was to maintain their exclusive world. And Hindley realized that she would never get parole without breaking from Brady. She began to drift back to the church and to rebuild her family ties.
I think Myra left Brady behind gradually. I think it was a gradual process. I think that she met in prison a different sort of person. She met priests, she met other ministers, she met people who looked at the world differently to the way Brady had. And I think it was a way of a slow process of drawing her back out of that darkness, back into the light.
In 1985, just when parole started to seem a real possibility, Brady shouldered his way back into her life. He went to the papers.
There was a chance of her getting out of prison, and Ian Brady thought, I'm not having that. So what he did was he revealed the fact that there were another 2 children buried on Saddleworth Moor. So again, it was him in control.
The Moors murders investigation was reopened. Jeff Knopfer of the Manchester Police visited Hindley in prison. She agreed to help.
I guess if I'm my most cynical, I think it was a clear process she engaged in with a view to her ultimate release. Keeping her mouth shut for 20 years had got her absolutely nowhere.
The search began for 15-year-old Pauline Reade and a 12-year-old boy from the Manchester inner-city suburb of Longside. Keith Bennett had been missing since June 1964, more than 20 years. Hindley's letter to Duncan's staff describes Keith's abduction. But as with the other deaths, she distances herself from the act of killing.
She was very careful to cast Ian Brady as the mastermind behind the killings, a person who had manipulated her into the killings. With Keith Bennett, she was sitting on a bank. She wasn't there while he was strangled. She was able to say that she was in a room getting food for the dogs when Edward Evans was beaten to death. She always put herself at remove from the actual killings, and what that did was cast Ian Brady as a person who actually carried them out, and cast herself as a reluctant participant, somebody who had been bullied into taking part in the killings.
We searched for weeks and weeks and weeks for Pauline Reade, and really we were looking for a bit of focus, because it's just a vast wilderness of peat sitting on top of this bedrock. She focused the work we did. She said that she was prepared to point out areas of settlement with more that were of interest to Ian Brady, and this was really code, I suppose, for saying she was prepared to point out the grave sites to us.
In July 1987, 2 years after the investigation had been reopened, the police team found Pauline. As had been the case with John Kilbride, Pauline's grave had been celebrated in a photograph in the Tartan album.
Finding any disappeared homicide victim in such circumstances is absolutely euphoric. But of course this is also tinged with the fact that, you know, this is somebody's loved one.
Keith Bennett's body was harder to find. He'd apparently been walked onto Saddleworth Moor and up to Shiny Brook, where he'd been murdered.
Hindley really said that she was just out of sight when this took place, but she was quite clear that these events had taken place in a peat gully. We searched every single gully, every single peat gully on Shiny Brook, and more besides, going right round the headland into another valley. And we reached a point where there was simply nowhere else to search. This isn't a wild goose chase. It isn't just a speculative search of a peat bog. It was absolutely information and intelligence led.
Greater Manchester Police called off the search. Pauline Reade had been found, but Keith Bennett was still missing. The search of Shiny Brook continues, but piecemeal, in the hands of the family and well-meaning volunteers. But if Keith really is here, was the best chance of finding him missed decades ago? Brady, and particularly Hindley, had been very friendly to the neighbourhood children when they'd lived in Hattersley. Just down from the house in which they'd killed Edward Evans lived the Waterhouse family. To 12-year-old Carol and her brother, they were just friendly neighbours. Now telling her story for the first time, Carol has asked that her face be obscured.
Myra was very easy, very sociable, very chatty, made everybody feel very comfortable. Talked to my mother a lot. Very bubbly. A modern young woman, I suppose, of her time.
Carol spent many hours with the couple, but particularly with Hindley, whom she liked.
They used to park their car just behind our house. They used to give us sweets for cleaning the car, and we quite liked it. They treated us very nicely, I suppose. Lots of adults completely ignore children, whereas they actually seemed as if they had time for us, and so that was quite nice, really. Myra was very, very friendly, whereas I think he tended to keep in the background a little bit. Myra was the one that did all the relationship work.
And they weren't just chatting over the fence. In Hindley's car, they roamed further afield.
I know they asked if we'd like to do something with them one day, and we went up on the moors with them. It was a very positive thing, and we were excited about it. I was being taken out for the day, somewhere different, somewhere I'd never been before.
Carol and her brother made the same journey to Saddleworth Moor that had been taken by the couple's victims.
I remember parking on the moors in a small lay-by, and then walking, and they brought a picnic with them. It was a nice day.
2 poor copies of shots showing Hindley at Shiny Brook are all that remain of the many photographs Brady took that day.
His camera was always there, so he enjoyed taking photographs, obviously. I can remember some posing. I can remember walking down the riverbed, and we stood at different heights. As the river dropped, we had our photographs taken.
These photographs became extremely important to Ian Brady. In 1971, he managed to get them sent to him in prison, where he viewed them on a hand-sized projector in his cell. The picnic he seemed so desperate to relive had taken place at Shiny Brook, where, according to Brady and Hindley, Keith Bennett is buried.
So the question arises, were those photographs taken to mark where the body of Keith Bennett was buried? And did Ian Brady ask for those pictures so he could relive that killing and enjoy it from his prison cell?
From what people have suggested, my photograph was taken on a grave. And whether that's Keith Bennett's or something else, I don't know. I was shocked to find that out. I feel, obviously, they used me in some way.
But do some of the photos in Brady's tartan album suggest the existence of a second burial site? Could Keith Bennett's body lie here? Keith Bennett has been missing for 50 years. His family have never given up hope that he might one day be found. For the past 2 decades, the volunteer search has been led by Professor John Hunter, one of the country's top forensic archaeologists.
It's one of those strange cases which is a no-body case. The offender is known, but the body's not been found. And as a result of that, unless police get new evidence, there's no way that they're going to put more resources into finding him.
In 2004, Doug Pickford, by now editor of the Leak Post and Times, spotted that some of the photographs in Brady's tartan album that everybody had assumed were of Saddleworth Moor were actually Ramshaw Rocks in Staffordshire.
It was immediately obvious that it was a place called the Roaches, and it wasn't Saddleworth Moor. I don't know why they took the photographs. Perhaps we'll never know why they took the photographs around here. We know they certainly came here, that's without doubt, and we know that they came on more than one occasion. Perhaps there was something more sinister there. So, as a newspaper editor, I started to ask the questions, really. What's going on?
Some of these photographs taken at Ramshaw are very similar to known grave markers. Could Ian Brady have had a second, secret burial site? Duncan's staff visited this dramatic sandstone ridge with his camera to try to work out precisely where these photos were taken.
You go to Ramshaw Rocks and you've got these giant, jagged rocks, like a moonscape, and it's very easy to locate exactly where pictures have been taken. If you then have the right camera, one with the same angle of view as Ian Brady would have used, you can line up exactly where Myra Hindley stood to take the pictures and where Ian Brady posed.
After 50 years of thinking Saddleworth the only gravesite, could Keith actually be buried 40 miles away at Ramshaw Rocks? Hindley spoke to Duncan's staff of 2 possible burial sites they'd considered for Edward Evans, both many miles from Saddleworth.
To me, the photographs are significant, and like all other things in this particular inquiry, you know, the important thing to do is to eliminate each particular site one by one. So where there's a photograph of Hindley or himself or whatever by a particular rock, then obviously that's a little red light goes off thinking, well, maybe this is a burial site. He liked taking photographs. He liked taking photographs of particular sites, which he sees as marker sites. And here are a series of photographs, so goodness me, they ought to be looked at.
On a filthy winter's morning, top body hunter, Professor John Hunter, and retired police body dog handler, Mick Swindles, have come to Ramshaw Rocks. They're going to assess the area as a potential burial site.
John, about 30. It's all right, it's enough.
It's not a place you can use aerial imagery, it's not a place you can use geophysical survey. You have to be manual. And the easiest way around that is to use body dogs.
Well, we've got two photographs here. One of Brady sitting on a rock. The rock's very identifiable. His position on it's very clear. And just below it, about 3 meters from where he was sitting, is a big flat rock with Hindley sitting on it wearing dark glasses. The whole area around about is fairly exposed, but there's a small concealed area just between the two, sort of place that you know, you might want to bury someone.
Downey is a brilliant place.
Yeah.
Under here. It's almost like a ready-made grave. Very little effort needed to put somebody in there.
Why are there two photographs here? One there, one there.
Having identified an interesting area, Mick Swindles gauges the depth of the topsoil. The holes he creates would also allow the scent of a buried body to reach the surface. Even 50 years on, it would be possible for the body dog to detect the smell of human remains.
Good lad. Nothing. In terms of concealment, this is a good place. It fits in with the photographs. It's nicely secluded. It's disappointing, but you know, you have to eliminate sites. One of them may be the right one, and you don't know until you test them all.
Without the active assistance of the police, even one of the country's top body hunters is going to struggle to find Keith. But 50 years on, John Hunter is not about to give up.
I'm not saying this is the point where Keith is buried. I'm not saying X marks the spot. I'm saying here is an area of specific interest which I think ought to be looked at.
I think we've got to make this absolutely clear. Ian Brady took hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of photographs, many of which are now in the possession of the police. Those alone are not sufficient to say there's some hidden significance that isn't apparent elsewhere. In other words, these are markers. There's nothing whatever to support that.
Them photographs and everything, well, it's shown of all them different areas. Every one of them areas should have been done. Every one of them. Not just one or two of them or half a dozen of them. Every one of them should have been done. If they've got a photograph like that, it's got to be searched. Why not? Why not search it?
So has Ian Brady won. After half a lifetime playing games with the police, will he take the secret of where Keith Bennett lies to his grave?
10 centimetres.
In his mind, it's, I know, you don't know, you want to know, and I'm not going to tell you. He has control, he has possession of the body.
He loves the idea of people being manipulated by him, of him dominating other people, of people being confused by his different presentations. He enjoys that very much, but it's deadly serious in every sense of the word, because if he can't have control over his environment, like any typical psychopath, he will simply lose it.
It's in his interests for the body not to be found, and it's also, it gives him, if you like, one up over the police and everybody else, because it hasn't been found so far. I don't want him to go to the grave without knowing that, in a sense, he's been beaten and that, you know, the grave hasn't been found.
I think he gets off in it. I know where he is and you don't. type of thing, you know. Oh, you're very warm, you're close, you know, and I think that is what he's getting off on.